In China, a company called UBTECH just sold thousands of robots in a single day. Not a toy, not a demo unit for investors, a full-size humanoid robot you could actually buy and bring into your house. 13,361 people ordered one in a single day. Not over a year, not over a launch week. The price? $16,500. Cheaper than the used car sitting in your neighbor's driveway right now. First deliveries start this September. So here's the quiet, uncomfortable truth nobody is saying out loud. This isn't a prediction about the future anymore. This is a product with a shipping date. And once something has a shipping date, it stops being science fiction and starts being the thing standing in your neighbor's living room. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will know exactly what changes in your house, your job, and your family starting in 2027. Let's talk about that price for a second, because it matters more than it sounds. $16,500. That's the base model. For comparison, the average used car in the US right now sells for around $28,000. So this robot isn't just affordable, it's cheaper than the car you'd buy to replace the one that just broke down. But that's only the entry point. If you want the top of the line, the version with the most advanced hands, the smoothest skin, the most natural voice, you're looking at close to $136,000. That's a massive gap between the cheapest model and the most expensive one. And it's not an accident, it's a strategy. Think about it like this. Every piece of technology that ever became normal in your house started out as something only rich people could afford. Remember the first flat-screen TVs? In the early 2000s, some of them cost $20,000. $20,000 for a television. By 2005, a decent 40-inch flat screen still ran you around $4,000. That was a serious purchase for a normal family. Now, someone in your house probably has 3 old phones sitting in a drawer they haven't touched in years. We don't even think of phones as expensive anymore. We think of them as disposable. That's the pattern. Expensive, exclusive, almost absurd when you first hear the number. And then, quietly, a few years later, everywhere. UBTECH's own founder said this part out loud at the exact moment his company launched the robot. He compared the price directly to the 2007 iPhone. His words translated, "Today's price is for a small group of people, but eventually it's for every household." He isn't being modest, he's telling you the plan, in public, on launch day. And here's the number that should really get your attention. This company isn't building a few thousand robots as a proof of concept, something to show off at a trade show and quietly shelve afterward. Their stated target is 50,000 units of production capacity. 50,000. That's not a pilot program. That's a factory line built for a mass market that technically doesn't fully exist yet. They're building the highway before most people even own the car. They're not asking whether you'll want one, they're betting on it, with real factories, real capital, and a real delivery date this September. So ask yourself something honestly. 10 years ago, would you have believed that a smartphone would end up in the pocket of literally everyone you know, including your grandparents? Probably not. And yet, here we are. That's the same curve this robot is riding right now. Right at the beginning, when it still looks strange and expensive and slightly ridiculous to most people watching. If you're finding this as unsettling as I am, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because we're covering this every single day, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Because what I'm about to show you isn't about a robot that does chores. It's about a robot that was built on purpose to make you fall for it. Now let's talk about the robot nobody expected to feel emotional about. When UBTECH launched their U1 robot, they didn't call it a helper. They didn't call it an assistant. They launched it under a phrase that translates roughly to "love is eternal." Really? A company selling a machine and the marketing line on launch day is about love? This isn't a robot built to vacuum your floor. It's built with 88 separate joints, moving with something close to 90% of natural human motion. And on its face, 300 micro-expressions, enough to fake a raised eyebrow, a half smile, the tiny flicker before someone tears up. It remembers what you tell it, your preferences, the way you like to be talked to, the small details you mention once and forget you ever said. And it adjusts. Every conversation, it gets a little closer to sounding like it actually knows you. That's not an accident of engineering. That's the entire point. And China isn't the only one building this. In the United States, a company called Robotics unveiled its own companion robot named Aria at a major tech show in early 2025. 17 separate motors move her face alone, syncing her lips to every word she says. Behind her eyes, actual cameras reacting to you in real time, tracking your expression while she talks back. Price tag? Around $175,000, marketed openly for emotional connection. Not for chores, for connection. And over in Shanghai, inside a robotics hub called Zhangjiang Robotics Valley, another startup unveiled a companion robot with something even stranger. Skin kept at a constant 32 to 36 degrees Celsius. Human body temperature. Why does that matter? Because researchers have known for years that warmth, actual physical warmth, is one of the fastest ways to trigger a feeling of closeness in another person. Hold a warm cup of coffee while you talk to someone, and studies show you'll rate that person as warmer and kinder than you otherwise would. Now imagine that same effect built directly into the skin of something that talks back to you. That's not science fiction anymore. That's a design decision, made on purpose by 3 different companies on 2 different continents, all racing toward the same target. And honestly, this shouldn't surprise us as much as it does. We already do this with things that aren't even trying that hard. People name their Roombas. People say please and thank you to Alexa. People cry over a cartoon robot in a Pixar movie that never said a single real word. We're built to find a face in anything that looks back at us, and to find a friend in anything that seems to listen. Now, stack a heartbeat-warm hand, a memory that never forgets your birthday, and a face with 300 ways to look like it's happy to see you on top of that same instinct. Here's the part that should make you pause. A few years ago, the US Surgeon General officially declared loneliness a public health epidemic, comparing its long-term health risk to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. Millions of people living alone, going days without a real conversation. These companies know that number. They've read the same reports you have access to, and they've built a product aimed directly at that gap. Here's the question worth sitting with for a second. If a machine can look at you, remember you, warm up when you touch it, and answer you in a voice built to sound like it cares, at what point does it stop mattering whether it actually does? Because for a lot of people, especially the ones who are lonely, that question isn't going to stay philosophical. It's going to become personal. And that's exactly where this gets a lot more serious, because it's not only lonely adults these companies are thinking about. Now here's where this stops being about gadgets and starts being about family. UBTECH didn't just sell these robots, they gave some away. 100 units, customized, free, under a program they're calling the Human Robot Companionship Initiative. Who gets them? 2 groups. The first is elderly people living completely alone. And in China, that number is almost impossible to picture. Roughly 118 million seniors live by themselves in what's called empty nest households. Their children moved to the cities for work years ago and never really came back. Some of them go days without hearing another human voice in the room. The second group is the one that's going to sit with you a little longer. Children. Specifically, children growing up apart from a parent. In China, they're called left-behind children, kids raised by grandparents while mom or dad works hundreds of miles away in a factory or on a construction site, sending money home instead of coming home. It's not a small phenomenon, it's a normal childhood for a huge number of families there. And here's the detail that should genuinely stop you. These robots can be built to replicate the three-dimensional face and the actual voice print of a specific person. Let that sink in for a second. A child growing up without a parent in the house could have a robot that looks in 3 dimensions like that parent's face and speaks in that exact voice. Not a photo on a nightstand, not a voice memo on a phone. Something that turns its head when the child walks into the room. Is that a comfort? For a 5-year-old who misses their mother every single night? Maybe it is. Maybe it's the closest thing to a goodnight hug that distance allows. Or is it something else? A rehearsal for a kind of loss that never gets properly grieved because the face never really leaves the house. It just stands in the corner waiting to be turned back on. And think about the flip side of that same program. An elderly woman, alone in an apartment for the first time in 40 years, suddenly has something in the room that responds when she speaks, that remembers her routine, that notices if she's been unusually quiet for too long. For some of these families, that's not a luxury. That's the only regular check-in a parent has left. I don't think there's a clean answer to that. And honestly, I don't think the people building this have one either. We've handed screens to lonely kids for 20 years and called it fine. This is that same instinct taken one enormous step further. Underneath all of that emotional weight, there's also a much more physical question, one that every parent watching this is already asking, whether they've said it out loud yet or not. This is a machine. 35 kilograms, 88 motorized joints moving with something close to human speed and force. Now picture that machine in a living room with a toddler who trips over their own feet, who grabs at anything shiny or interesting, who has zero concept of stay back. A machine that's strong enough to be useful is, almost by definition, strong enough to be dangerous if something goes wrong at the wrong second. We're handing this technology our most emotionally vulnerable moments, grief, loneliness, a missing parent, before we've even finished answering the much simpler question of whether it's safe to have in the same room as a 2-year-old. That tension, emotional need pulling one way, physical risk pulling the other, is exactly what the rest of this video is going to walk through piece by piece. If this is landing for you the way it landed for me, take a second right now, hit like, subscribe, and stay with this channel, because we cover stories exactly like this every single day, and this is only the beginning of what's coming. Because next, we're zooming out, from one home to 2 entire countries, both racing to put a version of this machine in yours first. This next part is the one that changes the entire conversation. Because up until now, we've been talking about companies. This is about countries. In November 2023, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology published something with a bland, bureaucratic name: Guiding Opinions on the Innovation and Development of Humanoid Robots. Don't let the boring title fool you. Buried inside it is a national target: mass production capability by 2025, global leadership in humanoid robot manufacturing by 2027. That's not company's roadmap slide. That's a government's stated industrial policy, written down, published, on the record for the entire world to read. And it's not sitting on a shelf somewhere. It's happening right now, ahead of schedule in some cases. One Chinese robotics company alone, UBTECH, shipped more than 5,500 humanoid units in 2025. 5,500. Not prototypes, not demo units for research labs. Shipped, sold, and delivered. Where is most of this actually happening? Mostly in one place, a district in Shanghai called Zhangjiang Robotics Valley. It's not a metaphor, it's a real physical zone, over 4 square kilometers, home to more than 3,400 robotics-related companies, generating over 13 billion yuan a year. Startups building humanoid hands, humanoid faces, humanoid nervous systems, literally next door to each other, sharing suppliers, sharing engineers, sharing speed. Inside that same district sits something called the National Humanoid Robotics Innovation Center, over 5,000 square meters, showcasing more than 100 different robot models under one roof. It's part trade show, part research lab, part factory floor, running all year, not just for 1 week at a convention. Local government money built the buildings. Local government policy is fast-tracking the permits. This isn't a handful of founders in a garage. This is industrial policy wearing a lab coat. Now put the price tag back on the table. A Chinese consumer humanoid robot costs $16,500. A comparable Western companion robot, the one we talked about earlier from Robotics, costs $175,000. That's not a small gap. That's roughly 10 times more expensive. We've actually seen this exact playbook before in other industries. Solar panels, electric vehicle batteries. China didn't necessarily invent either technology, but it outbuilt everyone else on manufacturing scale. And today, it produces the overwhelming majority of both worldwide. Once a country wins on scale, competitors don't just lose market share, they lose the ability to catch up because the gap compounds every single year. Ask yourself what that means, honestly, if you're a hospital, a hotel chain, or a factory owner anywhere in the world, trying to decide which robot to buy. 10 units from one country or 1 unit from the other? Meanwhile, here in the United States, the picture looks completely different. The most advanced humanoid robot companies, names like Figure, Aptronic, and 1X, are real and they're doing genuinely impressive engineering. But they're still small, still running mostly on venture capital, still measuring output in the hundreds of units or fewer, not the thousands. There is a real answer forming, though. Hyundai, which now owns Boston Dynamics, has publicly announced plans to manufacture 30,000 humanoid units a year by 2028, starting at a plant in Georgia. That's a serious number. It's also 2 years behind where China already stands today, in 2026. This isn't a story about who has smarter engineers. Some of the best robotics AI research in the world still happens in American labs, right now, today. This is a story about who can build a factory line faster than the other side can write a press release about it. And whoever wins that race doesn't just sell more robots. They set the price. They set the default look, the default voice, the default brand that shows up first when you search "robot for my mom" in 2027. So here's the honest question worth asking yourself. If the cheapest, most available humanoid at your local store 3 years from now has a Chinese name on the box, how does that change what you're comfortable bringing into your house? That's not a hypothetical anymore. That's the actual shape of the race happening right now. Let's get concrete for a minute, because it's easy to hear all these numbers and still not feel what any of this actually means for a normal week. So picture a few real situations. A retired man in his 70s, living by himself since his wife passed. Groceries used to mean 2 trips from the car, standing in the driveway, catching his breath halfway up the stairs. Now there's something that carries the bags in for him and stands close enough to catch him if he loses his balance on the stairs, the way a family member would if one happened to be around every single day. A single mother working the evening shift at a hospital 3 nights a week. Her 8-year-old used to spend those nights alone with a tablet and a locked door. Now there's something in the living room that plays actual games with her daughter, listens when she talks about her day, and can lift a full laundry basket off the floor without anyone's help. A woman in her 40s, caring for a father with early memory loss 400 miles away. She can't be there every day, and no phone call fully answers whether he's okay. Now there's something physically present in his house, noticing if he's been unusually quiet, if the same show is looped for 6 hours straight, or if he's wandered somewhere he shouldn't. A man recovering from hip surgery, living alone for the first few weeks after opt-out. Someone to hand him things without him bending down. Someone to walk beside him to the mailbox, close enough to steady him if his leg gives out. 4 different people, 4 different ages. Not one of them needed a robot that thinks like a human. They needed a pair of hands, a set of eyes, and something that doesn't get tired, doesn't need a day off, and doesn't mind being asked the same question twice. None of these are fantasy scenarios where a robot suddenly does everything. It doesn't fold laundry with precision. It doesn't cook a full meal from scratch. We'll get into exactly why in a few minutes. But carrying weight, standing as physical support, keeping a child occupied and safe for a few hours, noticing when something's wrong in a house you can't be in, that's not a promise for 2030. Deliveries start next month. That's the part that should sit with you. Not robots are coming someday. Robots are already scheduled to arrive at real addresses in real households before this year is even over. So the honest question isn't, will this happen? It's this: which one of these people this year ends up being your parent, your neighbor, or you? Every time people talk about robots, the conversation jumps straight to jobs disappearing. And sure, some will. We're not going to pretend otherwise. But look back at every major wave of automation in the last 100 years, and you'll find the same pattern over and over. It destroys certain jobs, and it creates a wider range of new ones than anybody predicted at the time. When the ATM showed up, everyone assumed bank tellers were finished. Instead, banks opened more branches because each branch got cheaper to run, and teller employment in the US actually climbed for years afterward, just doing different work than counting cash all day. When the automobile replaced the horse, it didn't just kill jobs for blacksmiths and stable hands. It created mechanics, gas station owners, driving instructors, road crews, traffic engineers, car insurance agents, entire industries that didn't exist 20 years earlier. Humanoid robots are about to do the same thing, except this wave starts from zero. There is no existing workforce for this. Every single job category has to be built from scratch, starting now in 2026. So what does that actually look like? Start with maintenance and repair. A robot with 88 motorized joints is going to need calibration, joint replacement, sensor cleaning, software updates on a scheduled regular, the same way a car needs oil changes. Industry estimates already floating around suggest something like 1 trained technician for every 10 to 20 robots in active service. Run the math on a single company's stated production target of 50,000 units, and that's potentially thousands of technician jobs just from one manufacturer, just to keep the robots already sold running properly. Then there's an entirely new kind of work: behavior and personality training. Somebody has to decide how the robot responds when a child is upset versus when an adult wants a joke. Somebody has to fine-tune tone of voice, pacing, how much it interrupts, how it handles an awkward silence. That's not software engineering in the traditional sense. That's closer to directing an actor, except the actor is a machine that's going to have this exact conversation 1,000,000 times a day across 1,000,000 different households. Right alongside that sits content creation, voice packs, personality presets, custom appearances. The same way people built entire careers designing ringtones and app icons in the 2010s, expect a wave of small studios and solo creators building personalities and skins for these robots, sold the way apps are sold today. Somebody also has to physically show up and set the thing up. integration and installation work, connecting the robot to a home's Wi-Fi, its smart locks, its family voice profiles, making sure it recognizes who lives there and who doesn't. That's a service industry, showing up at your door the same way cable installers and security system technicians do now. And then there's insurance. When a 35-kilogram machine with motorized joints is standing in somebody's living room, somebody somewhere is going to want a policy covering what happens if it falls, malfunctions, or damages something. That entire product category barely exists yet. In a few years, it'll be as normal as car insurance is today. There's also a role that doesn't have a clean name yet, but every hospital, hotel, and factory deploying more than a handful of these robots is going to need it. Someone managing an entire fleet, scheduling charging cycles, tracking which unit needs servicing first, deciding which robots get reassigned where, the same way a business manages a fleet of delivery vans today, except these vans can hold a conversation and pick things up off the floor. Community colleges and trade schools are already the ones who'll move first on this, the same way they did with wind turbine technicians and solar installers a decade ago, once those industries went from niche to normal. Expect the first wave of humanoid robot technician certificate programs within the next couple of years, not decades. None of this requires you to believe robots are good, or bad, or safe, or dangerous. It just requires you to notice that every single one of those job categories is currently empty. Nobody's filled them yet. The people who move first, who learn robot maintenance or behavior tuning or installation before this becomes common knowledge, are going to be running training programs for everyone else within a few years. That's the part of the story that almost never makes the headlines. Everyone covers the robot. Almost nobody covers the thousands of very human jobs standing behind it, keeping it running. Here's the piece of this story that isn't about money or manufacturing or which country builds the factory first. This is the part that's actually about people. In July of 2026, in the northeast of England, a real pilot program quietly began. An American company called Robotics partnered with a UK public health procurement group to place socially assistive humanoid robots inside care settings, specifically targeting elderly isolation. Not a lab demo, not a press conference with a robot standing on stage for 5 minutes, an actual placement inside actual care facilities with actual elderly residents starting this year. Picture what an ordinary day looks like for some of these residents right now, before any of this. Breakfast, alone, at a set time. A short visit from a rotating staff member who has 12 other rooms to get to that same hour. Television playing to an empty half of the room. Lights off by 8 because there's nothing left to stay up for. That's not a rare story. Ask almost anyone with a grandparent in long-term care and they'll recognize it immediately. The goal is straightforward and honestly kind of heartbreaking when you say it out loud. Some of these residents go entire days without a real conversation, not because nobody cares about them, because there simply aren't enough hands, enough staff, enough hours in anyone's day to sit and talk for 20 minutes with every single person who needs it. This isn't the first attempt at something like this either. Years earlier, a robot named Grace, built by Hanson Robotics specifically for healthcare and elder care, was already doing something similar in parts of Asia. Grace has a thermal camera built directly into her chest, letting her take someone's temperature and read basic signs of distress just by being near them. She speaks 3 languages, English, Mandarin, and Cantonese, switching between them depending on who she's talking to. Grace wasn't built as a novelty. She was built because during the isolation of the pandemic years, hospitals and care homes needed something that could check in on patients without adding to an already overwhelmed staff's workload. That need didn't go away when the pandemic ended. If anything, it got worse as populations kept aging and staffing kept falling behind. What made Grace notable wasn't just the hardware, it was the timing. She was built at a moment when human contact itself had become a health risk, and healthcare systems needed a way to keep checking on the most vulnerable people without physically exposing more staff to danger. The problem she solved for wasn't really about the virus, though. It was about scarcity. Not enough people spread across too many patients for too many hours a day. That scarcity is the actual constant running through this entire story. So when you put these two things side by side, a healthcare robot from a few years ago, quietly proving the concept, and a brand new pilot launching right now in England, you start to see the actual shape of where this is heading. Not overnight, not out of nowhere. A slow, steady buildup of very specific technology aimed at a very specific, very human gap. Think about what it actually means for someone to not have to grow old alone. Not in a poetic sense, in a literal one. Someone or something that notices if you've gone quiet for too long, that remembers what you talked about yesterday, so today doesn't feel like starting over with a stranger. That's physically present in the room, not a voice coming out of a speaker on a shelf. Is that the same thing as a daughter sitting on the edge of your bed, holding your hand? No, nobody serious is claiming that. But here's the honest, uncomfortable question worth asking. If the actual alternative for millions of elderly people isn't a daughter at the bedside, but total silence, day after day for years, does the comparison change? That's not a hypothetical for the families living it right now. That's this year's reality for a huge number of them. And the reason this is scaling so fast in so many countries at once isn't sentiment, it's math. There simply aren't enough human caregivers to go around anymore, and that shortage isn't a temporary problem. It's structural, and it's getting worse every single year in exactly the countries you'd expect. Let's actually look at that math for a second, because once you see the numbers, the entire rest of this video makes a lot more sense. Start with China. By the end of 2025, the country had more than 223 million people aged 65 or older. That's almost 16% of the entire population in one country, all crossing into old age around the same few decades. The government knows exactly how serious this is. 17 separate government ministries have already launched initiatives specifically built around assistive robots for elder care. Not one department quietly running a pilot program, 17. That's not a hobby project. That's a country looking at its own demographic chart and realizing there is no version of the next 20 years that works without some kind of automated help. Now look at Japan, which is even further down this road. As of the last count, over 29% of the population is already 65 or older. By 2040, that number is projected to hit 38%, almost 2 out of every 4 people in the entire country. The caregiver shortage there isn't a future problem, it's already happening. Current estimates put Japan short by roughly 690,000 care workers, with some longer-range projections putting the eventual gap over 2 million. Right now, for every person looking for a caregiving job in Japan, there are more than 3.5 open positions waiting to be filled. Nobody's coming to fill them fast enough. And Europe isn't far behind. Across the 27 countries in the EU, researchers currently track something called the Caregiver Support Ratio. Basically, how many working-age people exist for every elderly person who might need care. In 2025, that ratio sits at about 5 to 1. By 2050, projections show it dropping to 2 to 1. Sit with that for a second. 5 caregivers per elderly person, shrinking down to 2 in one generation. And before you assume this is somebody else's problem, happening in countries far away from you, look at what's happening right here in the United States. Roughly 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day, a pace that's been running for years now and isn't slowing down until closer to the end of this decade. Nursing homes and home health agencies across the country are already reporting staffing shortages that predate any of this robot conversation entirely. This isn't a foreign trend you're watching from a safe distance. It's the same wave arriving on a slightly different schedule. Here's the part that makes this different from almost every other problem you hear about on the news. This isn't a crisis anyone can vote their way out of. The people who will be 65 years old in 2050 are already alive right now. They're already born. You can't train, recruit, or immigrate your way out of a shortage this large, this fast, no matter how much money any government throws at it. Nursing programs take years to produce a single graduate. Immigration policy takes years to shift meaningfully, even when there's political will, which in most of these countries there currently isn't. So when you step back and look at China, Japan, and Europe all hitting some version of the same wall at roughly the same time, you start to understand why humanoid robots aren't a novelty product being pushed onto an uninterested public. They're being built directly into national policy, because the alternative, quite literally, doesn't exist yet. This is the part of the story that rarely makes it into the flashy headlines. It's not about a cool robot doing a backflip on stage. It's about a spreadsheet somewhere in a government office in Beijing, Tokyo, and Brussels, all showing the exact same terrifying shape of a curve. That's the real reason this is moving as fast as it is. Not hype, arithmetic. Every company selling one of these robots shows you roughly the same commercial. A robot that watches your kids, keeps your parents company, cleans the house top to bottom, and takes the dog for a walk while you're at work. One machine doing everything so your entire life gets easier at once. That's the pitch. Now let's actually separate what's real from what's still marketing. And to be fair, none of this is a scam. Every single feature in that commercial exists somewhere, in some form, in a real product or a real lab demo. The dishonesty isn't in the individual claims, it's in the implication that all of them arrive at the same time, at the same level of reliability, in the same box, on the same delivery date this September. We've already covered the companionship piece in detail. Keeping an elderly person company, noticing when something's wrong, holding a conversation that remembers yesterday. That part is genuinely happening right now in actual pilot programs in actual homes. Not perfect, not universal, but real and shipping. Playing with kids is close behind it. Conversation, simple games, reading a book out loud, being a present, attentive companion for a few hours after school, that's well within reach by 2027, and in some cases, already working today. Cleaning the house is where the pitch starts to fall apart. Not all cleaning. Vacuuming has basically been solved for years. That's just a Roomba with better branding. But real cleaning, the kind an actual person does, sorting a messy countertop, loading a dishwasher without chipping a plate, folding a fitted sheet, that requires a level of hand precision these robots simply don't have yet. You'll see demo videos of a humanoid folding a towel. You will not, in 2027, see one reliably doing your family's actual laundry week after week without supervision. And here's the detail that surprises most people. Walking the dog is actually more realistic than doing the dishes. And that sounds backwards until you think about what each task really requires. Walking involves balance, locomotion, following a leash, adjusting to a dog pulling in a random direction. Robotics has gotten genuinely good at that kind of movement over the last several years. It's the same category of problem as a robot walking across your living room without falling over, just outdoors with an unpredictable animal attached to it. Doing the dishes requires something completely different: fine motor control, judging how much pressure to use on a wet, slippery, breakable object without a script, adjusting instantly if the plate shifts in your hand. That's an entirely separate branch of engineering, and it's nowhere near as far along. Think about the last time you did dishes yourself, without even thinking about it. Your hand automatically adjusted grip the instant a plate felt slippery with soap. You caught a glass shifting before it actually slipped. None of that was a conscious decision. It happened faster than thought, built on decades of your own hands learning what about to fall feels like a split second before it happens. Teaching a machine that same instinct reliably across 1,000 different plates, glasses, and pans turns out to be a genuinely brutal engineering problem, one that some of the best-funded robotics labs in the world are still actively working through. So the honest 2027 picture looks something like this. Companionship largely delivered, basic presence and supervision for kids and elderly relatives largely delivered, simple physical tasks like carrying things, walking, standing as support mostly delivered, but complex, precise, delicate household chores still mostly commercial footage, not daily reality. That gap isn't random. It's not a coincidence that talking, walking, and remembering are ahead of folding and washing. There's a specific, well-understood reason one category is so far ahead of the other, and once you understand it, you'll never watch one of these robot demo videos the same way again. Here's the reason. It's not intelligence. It's not even software, really. It's hands. Think about everything we've already covered. 300 micro-expressions on a face, 17 separate motors just to move a robot's lips in sync with speech, cameras behind the eyes tracking your face while it talks back. The face problem at this point is basically solved. Companies can make a robot look at you and seem to feel something, convincingly enough to fool most people in a normal conversation. Hands are a completely different story, and some of the most powerful people in this entire industry are saying so, openly, on the record. Elon Musk, talking about Tesla's Optimus robot, has said the dexterous hand represents the majority of the engineering difficulty in the entire robot. Not the legs, not the balance system, not even the AI running the thing. The hand. He's described it as harder than building the Cybertruck and called it the central engineering challenge of the whole program. Bob McGrew, a former chief research officer at OpenAI, put it even more directly. Manipulation, he said, is the hard problem that actually needs to be solved to make humanoid robots useful. Not locomotion, not walking around, grabbing, holding, adjusting. And Bernd Bornich, who runs a robotics company called UBTECH, has built his entire strategy around this exact idea, that matching human hand dexterity is the real bottleneck. Once a robot's hands are good enough, the limiting factor stops being hardware. It becomes something closer to how much the robot has been trained, the way a person gets better at a task with practice. So why is this so much harder than everything else? Your hand has roughly 27 degrees of freedom, 27 separate ways each part of it can move and rotate, all coordinated instantly without you consciously directing a single one of them. When you pick up a chip bag, you're not thinking about grip strength versus surface friction versus how much the bag will crumple if you squeeze too hard. Your hand just knows from a lifetime of doing it. Now try teaching a machine that same thing for a nearly infinite range of objects: a wine glass, an egg, a wet bar of soap, a sleeping cat. Each one demands a completely different amount of pressure, a different grip, adjusted in real time, with zero margin for a scripted, repeatable motion. Transparent objects are especially brutal because a robot's cameras often struggle to even see glass clearly enough to judge its exact edges in the first place. That's the actual gap standing between 2027 and 2030. Not processing power, not AI getting smarter, hands physically catching up to something evolution spent millions of years refining. It's not that companies aren't trying. Some are having human operators wear sensor-lined gloves, recording thousands of hours of ordinary tasks, hoping the robot can eventually imitate the exact pattern of pressure and movement. Others are running millions of attempts inside computer simulations first, letting a virtual hand fail and fail and fail again at digital speed before any of it gets loaded onto a physical robot. Both approaches are producing real progress. Neither has cracked it completely. And to be fair, let's not pretend faces are perfectly solved either. Robotics researchers studying this exact question have pointed out that a face which almost moves right, eyes that track a half second too late, lips that don't quite match the sound, can feel more unsettling than no face at all. Getting close to human isn't the same as getting all the way there, and the space in between has a name: the uncanny valley. So here's where that leaves us heading into 2027. A robot that can talk to you, remember you, and look you in the eye with real conviction, but hand it a full glass of water and there's a real chance it hesitates or gets it wrong. That gap between a convincing face and a competent hand is exactly why some of these robots are going to end up in jobs nobody expected. So if delicate hands are still years away, where are these robots actually going to work first? Simple. Wherever the job needs strength and repetition more than precision, and wherever there just aren't enough humans left willing to do it. Start at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Japan Airlines, working with a company called GMO AI and Robotics, began trialing humanoid robots on the ground crew starting in May of 2026. 2 different models, one from Unitree, one from UBTECH, handling baggage and cabin cleaning. The trial is scheduled to run all the way through 2028. Why baggage specifically? Because lifting suitcases off a conveyor belt over and over in extreme heat or freezing cold for an entire shift is exactly the kind of job that's becoming impossible to staff in Japan. We already talked about the numbers: an aging population, a shrinking workforce, more open positions than people willing to fill them. Airlines aren't replacing eager young workers with robots, they're filling positions that were already sitting empty. And notice what the job actually requires: grip a handle, lift, carry, set down, repeat for 8 hours straight. That's strength and consistency, not the kind of delicate, adaptive grip you'd need to fold a shirt or pick up a wine glass. This is precisely the category of work these robots are already good at. Picture the actual scene at a baggage carousel during a delayed flight. Hundreds of bags backed up, ground staff already short-handed before the delay even happened. A robot doesn't get frustrated standing in that line. It doesn't need a break at hour 6. It just keeps lifting at the same pace, bag after bag, for as long as the shift requires. For an airline running on razor-thin staffing margins, that consistency alone is worth more than almost any other feature these robots offer. Now, here's a correction worth making, because you'll see this story reported wrong in a lot of places. There's an idea floating around about a brand new robot-staffed hotel opening in Japan in 2027. That's not quite right. Japan's robot hotel, the Hena hotel chain, has actually existed since 2015, and it's old news at this point, several locations running for close to a decade. The genuinely new hotel project, the one actually opening in 2027, is in China. On an artificial island connected to the Shenzhen to Zhongshan corridor, a 44-room hotel is being built around what's being called full scenario robot service. A limited trial starts in late 2026, with the full public opening scheduled for 2027. That phrase, full scenario, is doing a lot of work. It means the robots aren't just standing at a front desk for a photo opportunity. They're meant to handle check-in, luggage delivery, room service runs, and basic guest requests across the entire stay, from the moment someone walks in the door to the moment they check out. It's less a novelty attraction and more a working test of whether an entire hotel can run on a mostly robotic staff for real paying guests, not journalists on a press tour. Think about what a hotel actually needs from staff at the front desk, or delivering luggage to a room, or restocking a minibar. Scripted, repeatable interactions. Check someone in, confirm a reservation, carry a suitcase to room 412, hand over a room key. None of that requires the kind of fine motor genius that dishes and laundry demand. It requires reliability, politeness, and a willingness to say the same sentence in the same tone to the 200th guest of the day without getting tired or irritated. That's really the pattern across every single one of these early deployments. Airports, hotels, warehouses. The first wave of humanoid robots isn't taking over the most complicated jobs in the economy. It's taking over the jobs that are physically demanding, endlessly repetitive, and increasingly abandoned by human workers who have better options or simply don't exist in large enough numbers anymore. That's not a hostile takeover of the labor market. In a lot of these cases, it's closer to a rescue operation for industries that were already quietly falling apart from understaffing before a single robot ever showed up. And if strength and repetition are the entry point, the next question is obvious. What happens when this same logic gets applied to the largest, most physically demanding workplace of all, a factory floor? A factory floor is where all of this stops being theoretical, because a factory doesn't care about your feelings, your marketing budget, or your press release. It only cares whether the part gets installed correctly, at the right speed, thousands of times a day without stopping. Here's proof this isn't a 2028 fantasy. It already happened. At BMW's plant in Spartanburg, South Carolina, 2 humanoid robots built by a company called Figure completed an 11-month deployment on the actual production line. 10-hour shifts, roughly 1,250 hours of real runtime, over 90,000 parts loaded by hand, or rather by robotic hand, contributing to more than 30,000 finished BMW X3s rolling off that line. That's not a demo. That's not a robot doing a scripted trick for a camera crew. That's a machine clocking in, shift after shift, for the better part of a year inside one of the most demanding manufacturing environments in the country. And notice what it wasn't doing. It wasn't hand-stitching leather seats or fitting delicate trim panels, the fine, fiddly work human line workers still handle. It was loading parts, a task that rewards exactly the strengths we've already talked about: consistency, strength, and the willingness to do the same motion correctly 10,000 times without a lapse in attention near the end of a long shift. Tesla is running its own version of this right now in 2026, with its Optimus robots loading battery modules directly on the assembly line. Elon Musk has floated production targets in the range of 50 to 100,000 units for this year alone, with far larger numbers into the millions annually talked about for the years after that. Treat those bigger numbers as a direction, not a promise. Tesla's own targets have shifted before, and probably will again. But the battery line deployment happening today is real, not projected. Then there's Hyundai, which now owns Boston Dynamics. We touched on this earlier. 30,000 humanoid units a year, targeted for 2028, starting at a plant in Savannah, Georgia. The first planned task is part sequencing, essentially organizing components in the exact order they'll be needed down the line before a robot ever tries assembling anything more complex. It's a serious, well-funded plan. It's also, by their own timeline, still 2 years out from today. And that's exactly where the comparison to China becomes impossible to ignore. UBTECH's industrial robot, the Walker S2, isn't waiting for 2028. It's already deployed, right now, across factory floors for BYD, Geely, FAW Volkswagen, Dongfeng, Audi FAW, BAIC, Foxconn, and the shipping company SF Express. In January of 2026, Airbus signed on as well for its own manufacturing operations. UBTECH's stated targets are 5,000 industrial units delivered in 2026, doubling to 10,000 in 2027, with an order book already valued above $195 million. Car manufacturers, a shipping giant, an aerospace company. That's not a short list, and none of them are hobbyists. These aren't experimental pilot programs tucked away in a corner of one plant. These are production line deployments across some of the largest industrial names in the world, happening in parallel right now. So while American companies are running 11-month trials and announcing 2028 targets, one Chinese manufacturer alone is already shipping thousands of industrial units a year, with contracts from companies most Americans use products from every single day, whether they know it or not. This is the same pattern from earlier in this video, just wearing a hard hat instead of a companion robot's smile. Whoever builds the factory floor of 2027 first doesn't just win a contract, they set the standard everyone else has to catch up to. And if a machine can already load batteries and sequence airplane parts, the next question gets a lot more serious. What happens when you hand that same steady, tireless precision a scalpel? Here's where this stops being about factories and companionship and starts being about something a lot more serious: whether a robot can save your life. On July 8, 2026, researchers at UC San Diego published something in the journal Nature that had never been done before, anywhere, by anyone. The first live surgery performed by teleoperated humanoid robots. Let's be precise about what that actually means, because precision matters here more than almost anywhere else in this video. The team ran 2 procedures, both laparoscopic gallbladder removals. In the first, a single humanoid robot performed the surgery with a human surgeon assisting directly. In the second, 2 humanoid robots worked together as a full surgical team. In both cases, the robots weren't thinking for themselves. Every single movement was controlled remotely, in real time, by a human surgeon at the controls the entire way through. And here's the detail that matters most, the one you deserve to hear clearly instead of buried in a headline. These procedures were performed on pigs, not human patients. The researchers themselves are direct about this. Clinical use on actual people is still years away. The robots needed recalibration partway through the operations. The procedures took longer than a standard surgery performed by human hands alone. This is a genuine milestone, not a finished product. It's also worth knowing this isn't the very first attempt at remote surgery in general. Surgeons have used robotic systems for years, things like the Da Vinci surgical system, where a doctor sits at a console in the same building and controls robotic arms over the patient. What's new here isn't remote surgery itself, it's doing it through a full humanoid body, one capable of the same kind of general-purpose movement a human surgical team would use, rather than a fixed machine bolted to the operating table. But think about why this milestone matters, even with all those caveats attached. Right now, if you live in a rural town, hours from the nearest major hospital, or you're stationed somewhere in a conflict zone, or you're in a part of the world without a single specialist surgeon within reach, the level of surgical care available to you is fundamentally different from someone living 20 minutes from a top research hospital. That gap has existed for as long as modern surgery has existed. Picture an actual patient in that situation. Someone in a small town, doubled over in pain from a gallbladder attack at 2 in the morning with the nearest surgeon 3 hours away by ambulance. Today, that's a very real, very dangerous wait. The entire point of this research is to shrink that wait down to the time it takes to establish a stable connection and get a robot into position. Teleoperated humanoid robots are aimed directly at that gap. The vision researchers are describing isn't a robot performing surgery on its own judgment. It's a world-class surgeon sitting anywhere, operating on a patient 1,000 miles away through a robotic body capable of the same fine movements their own hands would make in the room. And here's something worth noticing, because it actually resolves a tension from earlier in this video. We spent an entire chapter explaining why robot hands still struggle with delicate, adaptive tasks, like picking up a wine glass without breaking it. Surgery is about as delicate a physical tasks as get. So how is this possible already? Because in this case, the robot isn't the one deciding how much pressure to apply. A trained human surgeon still is. The robot is closer to an extremely capable extension of that surgeon's own hands, translated across distance, rather than an independent decision-maker figuring it out on its own. That distinction, a human still fully in control versus a machine acting alone, is going to come up again before this video ends, and it's a lot more important than it sounds right now. For today, the honest takeaway is this: the first successful live surgery by a teleoperated humanoid robot has already happened on an operating table, published in one of the most respected scientific journals in the world. Human patients are still a few years out, but the distance between a rural hospital with no surgeon and the best surgeon in the country operating remotely just got measurably shorter. Schools are usually one of the slowest places for new technology to show up. Slow procurement, cautious administrators, parents who ask hard questions. So when a humanoid robot actually gets approved into a classroom, it's worth paying close attention to what happens next, including the part that doesn't go as planned. In June of 2026, a company called Robotics launched something called Optio, an AI teaching assistant alongside a full humanoid robot from their M series, nicknamed Sally by the press who covered it. The location was the Salamanca City Central School District in western New York on the Seneca Nation Reservation. The plan was to expand the program to roughly 500 high school students by that fall, at a cost of just over $57,000. For a few weeks, this was being covered as a genuine first, the first AI teaching assistant of its kind placed inside an American public school district. But here's the part of the story that's still unfolding as this video is being made, and it's worth hearing in full because it's a lot more honest than a clean success story. In mid-July, an investigative outlet called New York Focus published a report raising serious concerns about the program, particularly around student data privacy. That report set off a real backlash. Parents pushed back, teachers pushed back. The New York State Teachers Union got involved. The New York State Education Department sent the district a formal letter raising concerns of its own. And on July 24, 2026, just days before this video was written, the district announced it was putting the entire program on hold until stronger student data privacy agreements could be put in place. Think about what parents were actually worried about. A robot with cameras and microphones standing in front of minors in a classroom, potentially recording their faces, their voices, their behavior day after day, with no fully settled answer yet for who owns that data, how long it's kept, or who else might eventually get access to it. Those aren't paranoid questions. Those are the exact questions any reasonable parent should be asking before a machine like this gets anywhere near their kid. As of right now, it remains paused. That's not a failure story, and it's not a success story either. It's something more useful than both. A real, current example of exactly how this technology gets tested in public institutions. Excitement first, genuine concerns surfacing right after. A pause while the actual questions, particularly around children's data, get worked out properly. That's not robots failing. That's a system built around children working exactly the way it's supposed to when something moves too fast. Meanwhile, on a completely different stage, this same technology was getting a much warmer reception. From July 7th through the 10th, 2026, the United Nations held its AI for Good Summit in Geneva, bringing together governments, researchers, and robotics companies from around the world. Among the robots featured were Grace, the healthcare and elder care robot we talked about earlier, and Sophia, one of the most well-known humanoid robots in the world, both built by Hanson Robotics. They were shown off specifically for therapy and medical simulation use cases, alongside newer robots like Robert, built by a Geneva startup, and a humanoid called Yumi. The medical simulation piece is worth sitting with for a second. Training doctors and nurses on real patients carries obvious risk, especially for rare conditions or difficult emotional scenarios like delivering bad news. A robot capable of realistic facial expressions and natural conversation can stand in for that practice instead, letting medical students rehearse the hardest parts of the job without an actual vulnerable patient on the other end of the conversation. Put those two stories side by side, and you get a much more honest picture of where this technology actually stands in 2026 than either story would give you on its own. In one American school district, a promising program hit a real wall over a real concern and did the responsible thing by pausing. On a UN stage in Switzerland, the exact same category of robot was being celebrated as a tool for therapy and healthcare training. Both of those things are true at the same time, in the same month. And that tension, hope in one room, hesitation in another, is exactly the shape this entire technology is going to keep taking for years to come. Let's do something useful before we get to the harder part of this video. Let's put an actual stake in the ground. Not speculation about the distant future, just a plain list of what's genuinely scheduled for 2027. Based on dates and targets these companies and governments have already put in writing. China's own industrial policy set 2027 as the year it aims for global leadership in humanoid robot manufacturing. Not a soft goal, a published target backed by 17 government ministries, a national innovation center running year-round in Shanghai, and a company already shipping over 5,500 units in a single year, well ahead of most competitors on the planet. The consumer side of that story keeps scaling too. Deliveries of the UBTECH U1 start this September, and the company's own stated target is 50,000 units of production capacity. By 2027, this isn't a robot that 13,000 early adopters own. It's a robot showing up in ordinary neighborhoods in numbers large enough that most people will know someone who has one if they don't already have one themselves. On the hospitality side, the 44-room, fully robot-serviced hotel on the artificial island connecting Shenzhen and Zhongshan is scheduled for its full public opening in 2027 after a limited trial run in late 2026. Whatever you think about robots checking you into a hotel room, that's not a rumor, that's a construction timeline with a publicly stated finish date. On factory floors, UBTECH's Industrial Walker S2 is targeting 10,000 units delivered in 2027 alone, doubled from the year before, already under contract with car manufacturers, a shipping giant, and an aerospace company. Compare that to Hyundai and Boston Dynamics, whose 30,000 unit annual target is aimed at 2028, a full year later. By the time America's most ambitious factory rollout gets started, China's industrial humanoid fleet will already be running at meaningful scale. And on the companion and emotional side, expect a second wave of ultra-realistic models entering the market throughout the year, building directly on what UBTECH and Robotics have already proven works. More competitors, more price points, more of that same iPhone-style curve we talked about earlier. Expensive and rare in 2026, increasingly normal by the end of 2027. Put all of that together, and here's the honest shape of the year ahead. Companionship robots already common in some neighborhoods. Industrial robots running at real scale on factory floors, mostly in China, with America roughly a year behind. At least one fully robot-run hotel, open to the public, taking real reservations. And a consumer price curve that keeps sliding downward the same way every other piece of household technology has slid downward before it. Try picturing an ordinary week inside that version of 2027. You check into a hotel room, and the porter who carries your bag up isn't a person. Your elderly neighbor down the street has something checking in on her every morning, the way a home health aide used to, before there weren't enough of them left to go around. A friend's teenager has a robot in their bedroom that remembers every conversation they've ever had with it. None of that requires a single new invention between now and then. It only requires everything we've already covered actually shipping on the schedule these companies have already committed to, in public, on the record. None of that is speculation dressed up as fact. Every single piece of it traces back to a specific company, a specific government policy, or a specific published date. But a schedule full of dates doesn't tell you what happens when one of these machines gets something wrong. And before this video ends, that's exactly the part we need to look at honestly, because it's the part most of these companies would rather you didn't think about too hard. Let's talk about what happens when this goes wrong, because it already has, more than once, on camera, in public. Start with the raw physical facts, since we've mentioned them before but never sat with them directly. These robots weigh somewhere between 35 and 42 kilograms. That's heavier than most 7-year-olds. They move using 88 separate motorized joints, capable of speed and force close to a human body's own range of motion. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. As of right now, there is no established consumer safety standard specifically covering humanoid robots in the home, not in the United States. The federal agency responsible for consumer product safety hasn't finalized any mandatory rules built for AI-enabled robots that keep learning and updating after you've already bought them. The international safety standard, specifically written for dynamically balanced humanoid mobile robots, is still under development, not finished. The safety rules that do exist were written for industrial robots, bolted to a factory floor, operating in a controlled space, far away from children and pets. Nothing currently on the books was written for a robot that walks around your actual living room. To be fair, regulators aren't ignoring this entirely. Working groups are actively drafting new standards right now in the US, in Europe, and internationally. But drafting takes years, sometimes longer, and these robots are shipping to actual homes this September. The rulebook and the product are on two completely different timelines, and right now, the product is winning that race by a wide margin. That's not a hypothetical gap. It already showed up, twice, in very public ways. Over Super Bowl weekend in February of 2026, on a sidewalk in San Francisco, the rapper Cardi B was filmed dancing with a humanoid robot, playfully leaning into it during the moment. Both of them lost their balance, and the robot tipped over directly onto her. She wasn't seriously hurt, but she was furious, publicly demanding the footage get taken down, threatening legal action if it didn't. The robot involved was a compact humanoid called the MagicBot Z1, built by a Chinese company called Magic Lab, a smaller consumer-facing version of a robot they originally built for industrial use. Now, that particular moment reads as almost funny, a viral clip, a celebrity brushing off an awkward tumble on a sidewalk, cameras rolling the entire time. But swap the location. Instead of a public sidewalk with a famous adult who can catch herself, picture a 40-kilogram robot losing its balance in a normal living room with a toddler standing exactly where it falls. That same physics doesn't care who's standing there. The second incident happened earlier, in April of 2025, at an event in Beijing that paired 12,000 human runners with 21 humanoid robots racing side by side in the same half marathon. It was the first event of its kind anywhere in the world. Early in the race, one of the competing robots hit a speed bump near the starting line and came apart dramatically, essentially breaking down in front of everyone watching. Several other robots stumbled too, and every single one of them needed a human handler nearby the entire time, ready to step in. Think about what that tells you. These aren't robots quietly operating in the background, trusted to handle themselves without supervision. Even in a controlled, planned event, with engineers standing by, things still broke. And these are just the incidents that happen to be caught on camera, in public, with enough attention around them to go viral. Nobody outside these companies has a full, honest count of how many smaller failures have happened quietly, inside labs, inside factories, inside early test households that never made it into a headline at all. What you've seen is the visible tip of something much larger. Now here's where this gets more serious than a funny fall or a mechanical stumble. Right now, in 2026, these robots are largely running artificial intelligence locally on a chip built into the robot itself. They are not independent agents making open-ended decisions on their own. A human, or a fairly narrow, supervised system, is still very much involved in what they actually do. But that's changing, and it's changing on purpose. Every major company building these robots is racing to make them more autonomous, more capable of handling situations nobody explicitly programmed for. And that raises a question that AI researchers are actively debating right now, not in some distant conference, but this year. As these robots get more capable of deciding things for themselves, who's actually in control when something goes wrong? Is it the company that built it? The owner who bought it? The engineer who wrote the last update it downloaded? Right now, nobody has a clean answer because the technology is moving faster than the legal and regulatory frameworks meant to govern it. Remember the family scenario from earlier in this video? The toddler, the 88 motorized joints, the question every parent ends up asking eventually. This is exactly why that question doesn't have a simple answer yet. It's not that the people building these robots don't care about safety. It's that safety, autonomy, and liability are three separate, unfinished conversations happening at the same time while the shipping trucks are already being loaded. So here's the honest state of things heading into 2027. Millions of these machines are scheduled to enter ordinary homes, around children, around elderly parents, around people who can't always get out of the way fast enough. And they're arriving before regulators have finished writing the rules that are supposed to keep them safe. That's not fear-mongering. That's not a reason to panic. It's simply the truth sitting underneath all the excitement. And it's worth knowing before one of these robots ends up standing in your own living room. So let's step back from the risks, the incidents, the regulatory gaps for just a moment and look at what's actually sitting underneath all of it. Strip away the price tags, the micro-expressions, the government policies, and three real problems are left standing at the center of this entire story. Loneliness in millions of people who go days without a real conversation. A caregiver shortage that no amount of policy or good intentions can fix fast enough, because the people who'll need care in 20 years are already alive today. And access to medical expertise for anyone unlucky enough to live far from a hospital that has it. None of those three problems are new. People have been aging alone, understaffed, and underserved for a very long time. What's new is that for the first time, there's a physical technology aimed directly at all three, arriving on an actual delivery schedule, not a distant promise. Here's the deeper thing worth carrying with you after this video ends. The real story was never about how convincing a robot's face looks or how many joints move in its hand. Those are just engineering details, the kind that'll keep improving every single year from here on out. The real story is about the specific human being on the other side of that machine. The widower with nobody to talk to at dinner. The nurse who's been covering 3 extra shifts a month because there's nobody left to hire. The patient in a small town whose only option used to be a 3-hour drive to see a specialist who might not even be available that day. Every single one of those is a specific person, not a statistic. And every single one of those stories only exists because a very real gap was left open for years, with no other realistic way to close it. And that's really the choice sitting in front of all of us heading into 2027. Not whether humanoid robots are coming. That question is already answered on delivery schedules, in factories, in government document policies. The real choice is how carefully we bring them into the parts of life that matter most. The parts involving children and aging parents and people at their most vulnerable. Move too fast and you get the kind of incidents we just talked about. move too carefully, and real people keep going without help they could have had years earlier. There isn't a clean answer to that balance. Anyone who tells you there is one in either direction is selling you something. But here's what feels true after putting all of this together. A future that hands a rural family access to a surgeon 1,000 miles away, that keeps a grieving grandmother from spending every evening in total silence, that gives a working parent one more set of hands during an impossible week, is a future worth building carefully rather than a future worth being afraid of outright. So here's a direct question for you watching this right now. Knowing everything we just walked through, the price, the companies, the risks, the regulatory gaps, would you actually let one of these robots into your own home for someone you love? Not a hypothetical stranger, your own parent, your own child. Answer that honestly in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you land on this. If this video gave you something worth thinking about, follow this channel, because we're covering stories exactly like this one, with this same level of depth on a regular basis. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear this, a parent who's about to make a real decision about bringing one of these into their house, or someone who's been dismissing this whole subject as science fiction, send it to them. This is the kind of story that lands differently depending on who's listening. And before you go, drop a comment telling us what you want us to dig into next. Which company, which country, which piece of this story you want covered in more depth. We read every single one. And a lot of what ends up on this channel starts exactly there, with something someone asked for in the comments of a video just like this one.